Did you really create a supplement that tricks your body into thinking it's fasting and is really true, extends lifespans by 96%?
Yep, true on both counts. When people fasted for 36 hours, there was this big increase in their plasma and cellular functionalities. And that's really significant when you can take already young, healthy people, do a single day's worth of an intervention, and then all of a sudden they become like super people.
I want it now.
Yeah. All right. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back. This is Forever Young, and I'm Dr. John Layke.
I'm Dr. Payman Danielpour.
What if you could get all the benefits of a 36-hour fast without skipping a single meal? Now, today we're sitting down with Dr. Chris Rhodes, scientist, longevity researcher, and co-founder of Mimio, a breakthrough supplement that mimics the biological effects of fasting, boosting NAD, activating autophagy, and even extending lifespan in model organisms by 96%.
Wow.
If you've ever struggled with fasting, felt sluggish, or just want to optimize your metabolism and brain, this episode is definitely for you. So, Chris, did you really create a supplement that tricks your body into thinking it's fasting and is really true, extends lifespans by 96%?
Yep, true on both counts.
I want it now.
Yeah. Let's kind of take a step backwards because I don't want to divulge all the secrets just yet. How did your background in metabolic science lead to the creation of Mimio?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I got my BS in biochemistry from Loyola Marymount University down in LA, but got out like a lot of college kids, didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I took an immunology fellowship at Stanford, where I just started, pouring through all the research I could get my hands on, going to seminars, learning everything that I could, and eventually came across healthy aging and longevity research, which I thought was really, really fascinating because it used to be, very much myth and legend, right? Like it used to be early on in the fountain of youth, and now it's this very active and rigorous area of scientific study. And when you're in that space, eventually you come across fasting because fasting is one of the only ways that we know of to reliably extend lifespan in animal models. And then beyond that, when you look at both the experimental and the clinical data, it also helps to, treat, prevent, or delay most major diseases. And the really fascinating part about that for me was that it does all of that without actually adding anything into the biological system, right? So it's not this superfood or this wonder drug that's causing these effects to happen, but
Right.
somehow fasting is activating, this dormant longevity bio program that we already have inside of us, but just isn't ordinarily turned on. And when that clicked for me, it made me mad. Like, great. So my body knows how to live to be 120 years old and in perfect health, but it's just not doing it.
Right.
So that was really the push for me to kind of be really, really curious about fasting. Like, what is it doing in the body that's causing these great longevity effects? And is there a way that we can, unravel, decode, recreate that bio program of longevity so that we can get these benefits of fasting, but without actually having to fast? So that's really what catapulted me into trying to answer that question during my PhD. I got my PhD in nutritional biochemistry from UC Davis, and that's where we did all of the foundational research that eventually became Mimio.
Did you run into any problems while you were trying to solve when you were starting developing this product?
Yeah, so interestingly, one of the problems that we ran into early on was figuring out what the right length of fasting was to really be studying to try and achieve these longevity benefits, right? Because there's a lot of fasting research that's out there, but a big problem in the space right now is that there's a lot of different definitions of fasting. So you get the intermittent fasting that's like, 16/8 or one meal a day. That's like a 24-hour fast. You have alternate day fasting. That's kind of, 36 hours of fast, then a 12-hour eating window, 36 hours of fast, rinse and repeat. You have the multi-day fast. So all of them also do different things from a biological perspective. So we had to figure out what is the right length of time to be fasting to really be looking for these, functional enhancements, this longevity promotion. So in order to figure that out, I then did 60 hours of fasting myself while I was taking my blood every couple of hours so we could track through all these biological changes that were happening. And what we found was that like that 36-hour mark was around exactly where we needed to be in order to really, maximize the benefits of fasting before we kind of, reach this plateau of where the effects, get to the maximal level, but then kind of stop going up after that. And that actually makes a lot of sense in the context of the scientific literature as well, because alternate day
Sure.
fasting is usually where you see the best lifespan extension as well. So that was really the first question that we had to answer. And like, the first big sacrifice that I did for the science.
Yeah. I mean, listen,
That's
that's
amazing.
that's a real sacrifice. I'm telling you, I go without a meal for 6 hours, and I can already feel my stomach eating myself.
For our listeners and viewers, when you're talking about fasting, are you talking about absolutely nothing, or you can have some water, or you can have something, or is it complete devoid of anything?
So definitely devoid of calories, but like hydration, water, totally fine. Especially when we were doing the study, one of the major things that we wanted to make sure we were controlling for was if people, had caffeine as part of their regular routine, that we wouldn't be, getting rid of that when they were doing the fasting, because that can have some of its own biological effects. So, anything on a day-to-day basis, anything lower than around 200 calories, biologically speaking, is really not gonna, break a fast in a significant way. So, the 5 or 10 calories that they were gonna have from their cup of coffee was pretty fine.
And what did you do? Did you have anything?
That was just water for me when I was doing it.
Okay.
Wow, well
That's
done.
great.
Let's say, in simple terms, what is Mimio, and how does it work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, in simple terms, Mimio is a fasting mimetic supplement. So, basically, what that means is that it's mimicking the benefits of fasting, but just through supplementation rather than actually having to do the fast. And how that works comes back to what we were doing for the actual clinical study where we developed the technology. So, what we did there was we had 20 people come in, 10 men and 10 women to avoid a gender bias, and we had them fast for 36 hours, looking at their before and after. And what we saw there was that when people fasted for 36 hours, there was this big increase in their plasma and cellular functionalities. So they became more anti-inflammatory, they became more antioxidant, they became more cardioprotective, they had much better metabolic markers, right? And that's really significant when you can take already young, healthy people, do a single day's worth of an intervention, and then all of a sudden they become like super people, right? That doesn't happen a lot in the nutrition space.
Right.
So we were really, really curious. What's the difference between this baseline state and this fasting state that could be causing these beneficial effects to happen? So we ran what's called comprehensive metabolomics, basically looking at all of the small molecule components of the plasma. And what we found was that when people fast for 36 hours, there's this unique set of molecules that are produced by the body that are really only elevated during a fast. And when we screened through those molecules, we were able to find this synergistic combination of four of them that when we applied them back to human cells, when we looked at them in animal models, could recreate these beneficial effects of fasting, including creating that 96% lifespan extension. So, what Mimio is basically just taking molecules that your body would naturally produce during a fast and then giving them back to you as a supplement so you can recreate fasting at the molecular level, get those same benefits, but without actually having to fast.
And in order to do that, what compounds do you essentially work with? I mean, what tricks the body? What's in Mimio?
Yeah, so Mimio is a combination of four of those metabolites that we found to be really upregulated during a fast. So that is nicotinamide, number one, spermidine, number two, palmitoyl ethanolamide, PEA, and oleoyl ethanolamide, OEA. And each one of those has their own like really interesting, use cases. Nicotinamide is, of course, really popular. It's a NAD precursor. And the way that your body utilizes nicotinamide is basically as a way to create all of the NAD precursors that we kind of know about, right? Nicotinamide riboside, nicotinamide mononucleotide. all of those are downstream products of nicotinamide. So when you supplement with nicotinamide, you can increase NAD plus levels, NR levels, NMN levels, as well as then, activating the NAD SERT access. Spermidine is, of course, is really popular as well, an autophagy activator, and works within the context of the full formulation to kind of activate a lot of these complementary pathways, making that autophagy activation even easier.
And just a brief overview. What is autophagy?
Oh yeah, sure. Autophagy is basically our cells cleanup and recycling
Right.
process. It gets turned on during fasting as, an energy conservation mechanism. So basically, it breaks down all of the dysfunctional proteins and organelles, like the cell junk, right?
Right.
Breaks it down into its, individual constituent parts, and then uses those parts to then build new proteins and new functional organelles. So you're really getting this, cellular regeneration, rejuvenation kind of process with
I
autophagy.
think urolithin A is another agent that stimulates autophagy. Why did you choose this one? I mean, it's interesting when we talk about longevity and the different supplements that are out there. I mean, this seems to be like the perfect combination in a supplement that does exactly what we want it to do. How do you choose these when you're going over the different ingredients or actives?
Well, what we like to say is that, we didn't really choose the formulation all that much. It kind of, chose itself because we were looking at all the individual molecules that we found that were upregulated during a fast that we knew had some kind of bioactivity. So that came down to a list of around, 24 targets that we then screened through individually and then screened through in combination with each other.
Gotcha.
So the reason why we have these four is because we identified that they work together and create these synergistic benefits. So to give you an example, for the lifespan extension analysis that we were doing, we found that each one of them could extend lifespan to a certain degree, whether that was 5%, 10%, up to, around 26, 30%, depending on the molecule. But when we put all of them together, that's where you saw this 96% lifespan extension, right? So these molecules evolved to work together within this larger, bio program of fasting. And that's the
Yeah.
really powerful thing about the biomimetic approach that Mimio takes to doing all of this research is that we're not trying to, create something new, so to speak. We're trying to recreate how your body actually works. And that's why these molecules stack together. And that's where, the discovery of the formulation really comes from.
Now, you talked about how you did this and then you had the biomarkers taken out every few hours. Is this what you're talking about? The 24, the about 24 biomarkers that you had? Is that what you were testing for every few hours?
What we were testing for every few hours was actually the functional metrics of the plasma and then the functional characteristics of the cells themselves.
Okay.
So we were looking basically at the cellular anti-inflammatory ability. So if we take human cells, put them on a plate, with the plasma from, a fasted individual or a non-fasted individual, and then expose them to a pro-inflammatory stimulant, then we can see how many pro-inflammatory cytokines the cells actually produce. And so the fasted plasma had way less cytokine production than the non-fasted plasma. So that's where we see these anti-inflammatory effects. And then very similar with antioxidant effects as well. Instead of a pro-inflammatory stimulant, we're adding a pro-oxidant stimulant and then testing how much oxidative damage and oxidative stress the cells are producing and retaining. And then for the cardioprotective ability, we're looking at what's called cholesterol efflux capacity. So basically, the ability of the plasma to pull out cholesterol from these lipid-loaded macrophage, which are essentially how arterial plaques form in
Sure.
the body. So it's your body's ability to actually pull cholesterol out of arteries and arterial plaques and these bad lipid foam cells that are forming during atherosclerosis.
That's fascinating. And just to follow up with that, how did you come up with the dosage of each one of these molecules? And also, how bioavailable are they? And is it enough to mimic fasting? Because, we always worry about, oh, we taking supplements are really going to work, or are we going to end up urinating, and getting rid of it, excreting it all out? Because sometimes there's too much and your body can't handle it, or it's too little for you to metabolize it. So, all of this is very fascinating. I'm just wondering how you know that it's actually going to work and mimic fasting.
Absolutely. So yeah, so all the experiments that I was describing up until this point, that's just the clinical discovery study that we did. This was back in 2018 is when we closed that out.
Mm-hmm.
So then after that, we had this formulation. We saw that it works in human cells. We saw that it could extend lifespan in animal models. So the next step was doing our pilot clinical study. And for that study, we were looking at a bunch of different dosages for all of the molecules. This was, we would design this as what's called a dosing and pharmacokinetic study. So basically looking at exactly what you're talking about. How much of these molecules do we actually need to use? Are they bioavailable? And then what effects do they have? So for this study, we had people come in, eat a standardized breakfast alongside a placebo control, and then looked at their plasma functionalities and cellular functionalities after that. And then had those same people come back after a washout period, eat that same standardized breakfast, but then with supplementation with different doses of Mimio. And what we saw there was that when people ate this meal on its own, you had this big loss of plasma functionality, which is really common for the postprandial state, the post-eating state. So you've got all this, metabolic chaos coming into the system, throwing your body out of homeostasis. You've got all these foreign molecules that are kicking off dietary inflammation, things like that. So we saw that people became pro-inflammatory, pro-oxidant, less cardioprotective. But when they ate that same meal with supplementation with Mimio, we were able to not only prevent all of that loss of function, but then actually add gains of function on top of that that mimicked the effects that we saw during fasting. So instead of being pro-inflammatory, their plasma became anti-inflammatory and antioxidant and cardioprotective. So that was, our first major study to show, okay, yes, we can mimic these effects in human cells. Yes, we can mimic these effects in animals. And then, yes, we can mimic these effects in people even when they're eating.
And that's why, look, for those of you listening and watching, that's why just taking a multivitamin and an antioxidant is nowhere near the same thing, right? This is, we'll say, on steroids. It's the next in the evolution of this. You've compared this in the past to rapamycin and metformin. How would you describe similarities and differences?
Sure. So rapamycin and metformin, those are both drug molecules, right? They're kind of the big anti-aging drugs as the field is right now.
Sure.
Technically there are no anti-aging drugs, but these two have been shown in many, many animal studies to actually be able to extend lifespan or at least extend health span.
Mm-hmm.
Metformin is an AMP kinase activator, and rapamycin is an mTOR inhibitor. mTOR being, one of the major pro-aging pathways, and then AMP kinase being one of the major anti-aging pathways. And those two, mTOR and AMP kinase, are kind of at odds or opposed to each other. mTOR is very much about growth, cell differentiation and division, replication. And then AMP kinase is very much about energy conservation, maintenance, repair, and the utilization of fat beta oxidation rather than glucose and protein metabolism. In terms of how those compare to Mimio, Mimio has a lot of similar activities as both of those two things together. So when you have the nicotinamide in there, that's going to be increasing a lot of NAD. NAD is also an energy sensing molecule in the body. So if you have a high concentration of NAD plus, then that's basically telling your cells, oh, we're in an energy restricted state. We're in like a fasted state. So that helps to turn on a lot of these fasting like mechanisms. Spermidine with the autophagy, that's also very AMP kinase, pro AMP kinase, like anti-mTOR, basically. mTOR is an inhibitor of autophagy. So if you can promote autophagy, then you're kind of getting these lowered mTOR-like effects. Then palmitoyl ethanolamide, PEA, and oleoyl ethanolamide, OEA, are also both AMP kinase activators, as well as a lot of other really interesting pathways, NRF2, as well as PPAR alpha, and that's kind of helping to control cellular metabolism and shift it more towards this fasting program that we were talking about before.
Is there any downside to taking these supplements, or is there anyone that has any contraindications or quote unquote allergies? Listen, we're in a field where people have complaints about everything. And I'm wondering if this is just really, in a way, just the wonder supplement where everyone is a candidate.
The really cool thing about this supplement and the biomimetic approach in general is that all the molecules that we're using are ones that your body naturally produces on its own. They're all human molecules. So they're really, really safe. They don't have a ton of side effects. What I will say is that some people do have a genetic sensitivity to niacin metabolism in general. So if you're taking any of the NAD precursors, whether it's nicotinamide riboside, NMN, you might have, a certain degree of sensitivity to their metabolism, which can cause some GI upset for some people. And usually when we encounter that, the simple fix is make sure that you're taking Mimio with food. And then you can try like splitting up the dose, right? Instead of 2 capsules 1 time per day, you can do 1 capsule 2 times per day, and then, incorporate it into a shake or a smoothie just to kind of help really spread out the dosage and make sure that you have other things that are in there that can help to bind the nicotinamide to make it a little bit easier to digest.
And a lot of people will say, once they start taking this, when are they going to feel the effects, or when are they going to feel like they are? Obviously, there's no real endpoint testing in the sense that, you can't prove to somebody they're going to live 96% more. But a lot of people, they'll come in and they'll say, okay, we're taking so-and-so. Where am I going to really feel the difference?
Yeah. What effects do they report?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's a good segue actually into our latest clinical study. So we just finished up in February our randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study where we were looking at what's the effect of 8 weeks of supplementation with Mimio. And what we found there was that we had these really profound impacts on appetite control and satiety. And that's coming from the oleoyl ethanolamide, the OEA that's in the Mimio formulation. So we saw that people really improved their maximum daily hunger, like they had lower mealtime appetite, they were more satisfied with their meals after they ate them and were fuller longer and got fuller faster. They had much better control over when they were eating, so they, higher scores of eating only when hungry. So lots of these really beneficial appetite control and satiety boosting effects from the product. We also saw we had really significant improvements in bloating and abdominal pain. So much less bloating in the Mimio group, much less abdominal pain. And then the big ones, though, are the blood markers that we were looking at. So we saw that after 8 weeks of supplementation with Mimio, we could significantly improve blood glucose levels and blood cholesterol levels. So not only total cholesterol, but really significantly reducing LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, right? As well as LDL particle number, which is an even better assessment of cardiovascular risk than LDL or total cholesterol. And then we were also looking at cellular stress levels as measured through oxidated LDL, ox-LDL levels, and got a really significant reduction there as well. So creating these beneficial metabolic appetite suppression, antioxidant benefits of fasting, but just with supplementation, no need to change diet or lifestyle at all. And we see all of that happen within 8 weeks.
So with all of that, did you also see weight loss?
Yeah, actually, what's funny is that we were not looking at weight at the time because we were really focused on the metabolic blood markers. So we were just looking at the appetite suppression score. So we didn't track through weight, which I wish we did.
I mean, I would assume for sure you're going to get some weight loss,
exactly.
only because you've got appetite suppression, you've got glucose control. I mean, it all will lead to the same type of result, but this is all fascinating.
In previous studies with just OEA on its own in obesity, you definitely do see weight loss there as a consequence of the appetite suppression.
Yeah, I mean, I would say for all the viewers and listeners, this could be the single wonder supplement because extending lifespan, looking at the metabolomics and what you're showing here, along with a rider of potential weight loss, I mean, this could be phenomenal for us. Do you think that the Mimio supplements could become part of an everyday regimen for people?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. So the way that I think about Mimio is really, in our Western society, we kind of constantly get this message that we are supposed to be eating all the time, right?
Mhm.
3 meals a day plus snacks is the typical Western eating pattern. And when you think about that, it gets a little intense, especially over time, because it takes the body around 4 to 6 hours after a meal to fully digest everything, make sure the nutrients are going where they're supposed to be going, storing things as fat or incorporating things into muscle, rebuilding your glycogen stores, things like that. That's a 4 to 6 hour process before you really return back to homeostasis and where you can get into that maintenance and repair mode that your body needs to be doing to keep itself up. But when we do 3 meals a day plus snacks, we're never really allowing ourselves to come out of that postprandial state. So we're always in this state of, okay, there's dietary inflammation that's coming in. We're in this state of metabolic chaos. We got to shift these things around. We got to store this over here. We're constantly focusing on metabolism, digestion, storage, rather than cleanup, maintenance, and repair. And what Mimio can do in that context is in this place where you're getting a lot of overstimulation of those pro-aging, pro-fed pathways, Mimio can help to activate these anti-aging, pro-fasting pathways at the same time to kind of help restore a homeostasis to your body that it's not ordinarily experiencing.
One question is a lot of biohacking is being done, obviously, nowadays, and using a lot of peptides. And the one thing I see with peptides, and whether or not, I don't know if you are on board with them or not, but what I do see is cycling, right? Like when people used to do with steroids back in the day, or you don't want to stimulate this all the time. I think this is a little different if I'm not speaking incorrectly here. I think this is something you just take all the time, every day, forever, right? And why don't you cycle this? I think I know the answer, but I want to hear it from you.
So why we don't cycle Mimio? So number one, the best research that we have done so far on, the long-term effects of Mimio are the lifespan extension studies that we've done. And basically that's lifelong supplementation with Mimio, no cycling, no anything. They're just constantly getting it on a daily basis. And that's where you see this really great lifespan extension effect. So there doesn't seem to be any, downside to constant Mimio supplementation. Number two, these are molecules that your body would not naturally elevate outside of a 36-hour fasted state, which most people, especially on a day-to-day basis, are not experiencing, right? So there's no real adaptation that your body is going to go through like it could with, say, hormone replacement therapy, right? If you're taking a bunch of testosterone, your body's going to lower its own production to
Right. So there's no negative feedback inhibition or
right.
anything like
Exactly.
that.
And then, yeah, number three, just like we were just talking about, right? Most people are constantly in a fed state. So, taking Mimio on top of that, again, just kind of serves as a counterbalance. So you're really not over indexing on the fasting pathways. You're really providing this helpful counterweight to all of that pro-fed, pro-aging activation that's going to be happening with, the more constant Western food intake.
Do you see a difference? Again, I'm imagining it's been shown. I know that you said it impacts testosterone and cognitive function. How does that happen? And how does it differ between men and women?
Yeah, great question. So when we did the randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study, we didn't see a ton of differences between men and women. And I think that that's because when we originally developed the formulation, we were looking at both men and women. So we were designing a formulation that was going to universally work for both men and women.
Sure.
And that's what we saw at the end of the day in the RCT as well. The one big difference that we did see in the men and women data is that the men just seemed to be a little bit more susceptible to the placebo effect, especially when they were tracking through their appetite. So for women, it was very much like, yes, for each and every single one of these metrics, the women could like palpably feel when they were on Mimio, and then the placebo, there was just no statistical trend at all. For a couple of the markers that we were looking at for men, everybody in the Mimio group could feel all of the effects that we were looking at, but some of them in the placebo group were also like, okay, yes, like I am also like getting more satiety out of my meals, or I am also like eating only when hungry, that kind of thing. When we split it up into men and women, that was the main difference, was that men seemed to be just a little bit more susceptible to the placebo control for the subjective appetite suppression scores.
Now, I know that most of what we do, like you said, this homeostasis that we have in our body is a balance of all of the different hormonal functions that we have. And as men, the one thing that really declines significantly as we get older is testosterone. How does Mimio affect testosterone over time, if at all? And how does it affect cognitive function, if at all? Because again, longevity is great, but if we don't have our strength and our cognitive function as we get older as men, it doesn't make sense to live longer. So does it affect it? Does it not?
Yeah, so we did partner up before we did our big randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study that I was talking about. We also did a clinical case study in partnership with Mount Sinai, the Dave Petrino lab there, where we were essentially just tracking through, all right, what are the effects of 8 weeks of supplementation with Mimio in this small population size, right? And what we saw there was that we actually got, after 8 weeks of supplementation, a 50% increase in free testosterone levels in men.
Wow, that's significant.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it was a lot. And we were very surprised about it. We didn't end up tracking it again in the big randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study because we were doing both men and women and focusing more on the metabolic side than the hormonal side. But yeah, that was a big increase in testosterone there. And we also saw in that study, kind of to this point of how can people track things through and what does this actually mean for human longevity? We saw that in that 8-week period of time, we could also get a 2.5-year reduction in biological age. Those were really the big effects there. We weren't testing cognition in that one, but there have been studies with palmitoyl ethanolamide specifically that have shown that it can enhance cognition in multiple different ways. It has this pretty profound effect on neuroinflammation and decreasing neuroinflammation, enhancing neural activity. So that's kind of the best data that I have on the cognitive effects of Mimio.
Yeah, it begs a question. Trying to think of caveman days where you didn't have a meal, stressed the body enough into going into this particular state where your testosterone increased in order to give you energy for your next kill. I'm just wondering, there has to be a biological reason for it, but it is interesting that it went up 50%. That's significant. When you're taking this supplement, when's the best time to do it? How do you do it to get into that pattern?
I think it's really different strokes for different folks. So you can use Mimio as a fasting mimetic, like we've shown in all of our clinical studies. When you take it with food, you don't have to alter your diet, you don't have to alter your lifestyle, and it can still give you these fasting-like benefits over time. But you can also use Mimio as a fasting enhancer, which is how I actually use it. So I still practice fasting. I'm on a 1 meal a day schedule. So usually how I'll take Mimio is in the morning alongside some green tea. So I get those appetite suppression effects. I get those, mood, memory, cognition effects that are happening. And that kind of sustains me throughout the day. I'll work out in a fasted state, then, come home and have my big reward meal at the end of the day. So basically really, helping to compartmentalize like work-oriented, super efficient Chris versus like, okay, cool, like eating and relaxing. I like that dynamic. But basically, for anyone who's doing anything less than a 36-hour fast, which is what Mimio was designed to mimic, you can use Mimio to kind of accelerate the benefits of your shorter fasts and then make fasting easier because of those hunger suppression and cognitive enhancement effects.
Here's your $1 million question. How does this work with some of the GLP agonists and your semaglutides and your tirzepatides, and now you're having the retatrutide, and everyone I feel is on it. But the interesting thing, as I heard recently, is now they're really running out of these compounds because they're being used at such a steady state. Can you take this with those medications? Is it something you can use in place of those medications and it's healthier? I would think this is a great alternative for it.
Yeah, it's really more of a $1 billion question than $1 million. But absolutely. So we actually are partnered up with a few longevity clinics around the country who are using Mimio specifically for that purpose as a way to help wean people off of the GLP-1 agonists. Because what happens with those drugs is, they're really, really great at suppressing appetite and suppressing cravings while you're actually on them. But people come off of them, all the cravings come back. You go through those hunger withdrawals, as I like to call them. And then you see that a majority of people regain about two-thirds of the weight that they initially lost within the first year of going off them. So there's this big need in the field for alternatives, like once you're coming off of the drugs to help you kind of reestablish a healthier lifestyle afterwards and maintain that weight loss. And so that's what our longevity clinic partners are using Mimio for, that appetite suppression effect, these, fasting like metabolic benefits to sustain that GLP-1 induced weight loss and appetite suppression into a more natural and sustainable alternative.
I will say something that for all you listeners and viewers, it's significantly less expensive and easier to do as well. It's interesting because, again, you'd have to be under a rock somewhere if you don't know about these medications, especially as physicians. And we see a lot of it. But number one, it's expensive. Number two, a lot of people can't get it with a prescription, so they have to get it from a compounding pharmacy, and that's stopping anyways. So I think this is a great alternative, and we're going to offer this at our longevity center because it sounds way too good. And all the research you've done, and you have to understand, we're talking to a PhD who's done the research and really has solid evidence behind this and is doing it himself, which really is one of those things. I think that if you use it and talk about it, it's the best way to prove to other people that it works.
Also, clinical studies are good for that too.
Yeah,
I know.
Exactly. Yeah,
your research has done it, so thank you for all that.
So when we think about all the people out there who have 10 different supplements that they're taking, is this more of this will supplant that whole regimen, or is it additive?
I definitely think that it can be additive because it's doing something for you that a lot of other supplements aren't going to be doing for you, especially because of this synergistic combination of molecules that we've put together, right? We identified that each of these molecules has their own individual effects, but when combined together, kind of activate a lot of these complementary pathways that more readily recreates what's actually happening during a fast, that longevity bio program, as I like to call it. And the really important thing with that is that not a lot of other companies, not a lot of other formulators actually go out there and test their products for synergy. When you stack things together like that, you can get things that are actually, counterproductive to each other.
They're just neutralized. So you take two different supplements that end up leading to zero.
And it's really hard to tell which is which. Usually my guiding light for, what I'm going to incorporate into my regimen is going to be, rigorous either clinical research or rigorous experimental research, right? So one of the resources that I love to utilize is the National Institute of Aging's intervention testing program. So it's one of the largest, most robust, like longevity intervention testing programs out there. Basically, massive mice studies across 3 different centers to make sure that all of the results are pristine and applicable and, really apply. And when you look through what testing they've done and what interventions they've actually found that are known to actually enhance longevity, it's a very short list.
Right.
And especially for natural molecules. So on that list, there are only 2 other natural molecules that I know of. One is astaxanthin, and then the other is glycine. And those are just the 2. So those are the ones that I incorporate into my regimen. And then other ones that have been shown within that program, to not actually have lifespan extension efficacy, I tend to just kind of avoid. So those are things like fisetin, for example, or nicotinamide riboside. Those are the big ones for me.
Going along that same vein, then, if let's say we're looking at your pocketbook and you're saying, all right, I'm going to add one more supplement, what can I remove? In your opinion, is there a class or types of supplements that you say, look, there's just not enough data out there. Why don't you now replace it with something that really has data? Go ahead and cut this.
Yeah. So definitely, like Fisetin is one that I would probably cut. Resveratrol is the one that gets me mad most of the time, right? Because
Yeah.
resveratrol is kind of like the OG longevity molecule, but we've researched it to death at this point, and it's just been shown over and over and over again to not actually extend lifespan and not do much for longevity in general. It's not very bioavailable, and even when it is, it doesn't have much of an impact on anything. So that's the big one where I say, like, if you're still taking resveratrol, stop taking resveratrol because there's
There you
really
go,
no
people.
point.
There you go. So Fisetin, resveratrol, these are just compounds that have been shown. They just don't have the longevity benefits. And this is something that, cut it from your stack and add Mimio. I love the fact that you guys are really doing randomized, blinded randomized controlled trials, because a lot of the supplement divisions, the new things that are marketed are really they're not causal studies. They're relational studies where showing, you're trying to find, even Framingham, you have these large studies, and that's where resveratrol really came from. It was that they noticed that people who are wine drinkers, they look at the compounds in wine. And it's so funny. Someone told me a while ago that in that same study, they noticed that people who, when we're talking about non-causal study, that means I take a supplement, it causes this to happen. But we are finding groups of individuals, and you find patterns that emerge and you relate it to that, right? So in some of these same studies, there were more people that had divorces that ate margarine over butter. It was kind of like these ridiculous causal relational groupings that didn't make active sense. It wasn't that people were getting divorced because they ate more margarine. It was they just saw these patterns. So I love the fact that you are moving forward with top tier designs to your studies. What's new? Are you working on any new formulations or any new and upcoming studies beyond this?
So we just completed our N of 42 study. That's the big one that we've done so far, but we'll continue to research the OG Mimio fasting mimetic formulation, do it in larger clinical studies, look at it in different populations, look at some different markers and metrics, really looking towards, biological aging and longevity in this next one, as well as more of the metabolic effects. But outside of that, Mimio itself is actually a combination of mimic and biology together. So speaking to this biomimetic research platform that we have on the back end. So in the same way that we ran this process with fasting, looking at the before and after and trying to recreate the system and these benefits, we can do that with these other interesting regenerative states of the body, like exercise and sleep or cold exposure and meditation, and really tease out what are the things that are happening in the body during these states? And then is there a way that we can recreate those benefits? So our next one that we're really focusing on right now is exercise. So really looking at, is there a way that we can put the benefits of exercise into a pill? And that's what's up next for Mimio.
Wow. Wow. This sounds phenomenal.
The ultimate lazy man stuff.
Yeah, I know. I was like, this is amazing. You can still eat. You get the benefits of fasting, and you don't have to work out. You get the benefits of exercise.
I'm sold. I'm ready to start taking
I know.
this.
Well, listen, I know that I've definitely incorporated Mimio into my new regimen. I think that, again, when you've got that type of science behind it, that helps. It helps you weed out between all of the 1,000 different supplements, in which 99% of them have no data behind them. So this is very important. Where can people learn more about Mimio? Where would you, or stay connected to your work? Where would you send them?
So they can go to mimiohealth.com, MIMIO health.com. And then if they want to follow us on any of the social platforms, we're at Mimio Health.
Amazing. Look, I definitely learned a ton. We're so thankful. I know you're a busy guy, and we definitely appreciate you joining us today. And we hope to have you in the future when we've got some even more, your next product and more research that's coming down the pipeline.
And we're going to update all our viewers and listeners on how we like it, because I know you've been taking it. I'm going to start taking it as well.
Yeah.
And Chris, we'll let you know how we like it as well.
Yeah.
Amazing. Love it.
If you like this video, you're going to love this one.
It's possible to modify aging biology and even reverse some of the functional declines that go along with aging. One of the big, I think, first indications of this were studies of rapamycin. Everywhere we've looked in the laboratory, we can give these animals rapamycin, they live longer, and they seem to be healthier, and it seems to be broadly slowing the biological aging process.